a political liability or a help for Prime Minister Abe?
I think it's a great help for him because Japan's defenses are totally dependent on the United States, and we need U.S. deterrence. So in a time of crisis, if the U.S. president is reassuring Japan, I think this is very important. However, having said that, I think my personal feeling is that it's very important to say it once, but it doesn't have to be repeated so many times.
What exactly? The president's rhetoric?
Yes. I think it could be said by some officials of the government, and I think the tone also is rather important. It doesn't have to come down to rhetoric of North Korea as well.
I'm curious how this is playing out for domestic politics. Prime Minister Abe has wanted to strengthen Japan's defense posture. There was even talk of amending your pacifist constitution written after World War II. Is this crisis making that a more popular position?
I don't think this is happening right away. Prime Minister has said that it's not an actual calendar now, and he's not trying to push the envelope too much because his party has lost very badly in Tokyo election, and he thinks humility is very important, so he's not trying to push his agenda.
What do you think North Korea wants out of this?
I think North Korea is trying to establish its own deterrence by really having missiles and nuclear bombs. And they're not trying to attack United States, but they think that they could be attacked by any other country, so they would like to have deterrence. So they will not easily give it up. We really have to have the pressure from China, and we have to really try to cooperate Japan, the United States as well.
How much focus is there, though, on this issue inside Japan?
Very much, every day. Of course, we have been under this for so many years, so it's not new, but still, the way they are coming seems more serious than us than before. So now the Japanese people are very much concerned, yes.
Ichiro Fujisaki served as Japan's ambassador to Washington from 2008 to 2012. He joined us via Skype. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Lulu-san.
You're listening to NPR News.
Did your high school science classes sound something like this?
Water molecule is polar with a partial negative charge on the oxygen atom.
But what if those classes sounded like this?
Things get really horrible as his skin rips apart and he sees a virus coming out from his insides.
I'm Guy Raz. Ideas about changing education next time on the TED Radio Hour from NPR.
The TED Radio Hour is coming up next at 11 on WRVO Public Media.
Support comes from Old Forge Adirondack Base Camp. From here, everything in the Adirondack Park is a day trip. More information on directions, accommodations, events, attractions, and restaurants is available at oldforgeny.com or by calling 877-OLD-FORGE. And from WRVO's summer destinations, including the Schweinfurth Memorial Arts Center and the Harriet Tubman Home, both in Auburn. Find more information about summer destinations at wrvo.org/summer.
I'm Giles Snyder with these headlines. Federal authorities are getting involved in the investigation following the clashes this weekend at a white nationalist rally in Charlottesville, Virginia. Attorney General Jeff Sessions says a civil rights investigation has been opened into the death of a 32-year-old woman. She was killed and many others injured when a car rushed into a crowd. 2 state policemen also killed when their helicopter crashed. Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman General Joseph Dunford is traveling in Asia. He is due to meet tomorrow with South Korea's president amid the tensions over North Korea's nuclear program. And Vice President Pence is kicking off a week-long trip to Central and South America today. He's scheduled to arrive in Colombia late this afternoon. I'm Giles Snyder, NPR News from Washington.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Babbel, a language app that teaches real-life conversations in a new language, including Spanish, French, and German. Babbel's 10 to 15-minute lessons are available in the App Store or online at Babbel, BABBEL.com. From the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, working with others to build a culture of health for all. On the web at rwjf.org. And from the William T. Grant Foundation at wtgrantfoundation.org.
This is Weekend Edition from NPR News. I'm Lulu Garcia-Navarro. It's not only North Korea that has been the target of President Trump's rhetoric this week. Late on Friday, Mr. Trump sent a surprising message to the Venezuelan government.
Venezuela is not very far away, and the people are suffering, and they're dying. We have many options for Venezuela, including a possible military option if necessary.
The Venezuelan defense minister described Trump's words as an act of madness, and the White House issued a statement saying that it had rejected a call from Venezuela's president, Nicolás Maduro. Most Venezuelan government officials have closed ranks around President Maduro during Venezuela's descent into political and economic chaos, but cracks are starting to show. One prominent defector is senior diplomat Isaías Medina. He resigned last month from his post representing Venezuela at the United Nations, citing alarm over human rights abuses by the Maduro government. Mr. Medina joins us now from Miami. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Lulu.
Can you first give us your reaction to President Trump's implicit threat?
Certainly. First of all, I don't think it's a threat. This is a fact, and in my opinion, the Venezuelan people, after so much suffering, will welcome a humanitarian intervention supported by military action with open arms.
You believe that they would welcome the United States coming in through military force to Venezuela right now?
Certainly. I mean, there is nothing else that Maduro can do to the Venezuelan citizens. He's taking their food, their medicines, treatments, and also killing them in the street.
Sir, Venezuela has been in a state of crisis for many, many years now. Why now? What was the motivating factor to have you resign from representing Venezuela?
Well, as you have noticed, the last 4 months have been very evident of going beyond and above all other negligent and ineffective actions that the Maduro government and the government of Chavez before him had accomplished. This time, it's a clear dictatorship. I don't think there is a possibility of anyone to stand aside and stay silent.
What did you expect that your break with the government would signify? What were you hoping to achieve?
Well, I'm doing it right now as I've just become the international voice for so many Venezuelans that are trying to reach out the international community to make them aware of the situation. And right now, what you saw about the U.S. is very important to highlight that military technology allows in a modern warfare tactical, operational, and strategic surgical actions with minimum civilian impact. And right now, it is so difficult when you see kids, students fighting the National Guards, sticks and stones against bullets. And this is why it's so important that the international community can come together for an international humanitarian intervention and help out and liberate 30 million Venezuelans that have been hijacked by an international criminal organization.
If that doesn't happen, what is the way forward?
It's a duty to act against a criminal organization that wants to impose a communist totalitarian regime by force, violating the preeminence of the Constitution of Venezuela. Therefore, there are formal militaries and also active military factions taking up arms. And it seems that this will be the only way to be able to stop Maduro's regime from continuing to act against its civilian citizenship.
What you seem to be advocating is essentially a coup. President Nicolás Maduro was legitimately elected.
Well, I wouldn't call it a coup. What I'm saying
that's what they would say.
Honestly, I think they will say anything to remain in power because they have nowhere to run. But what is very important is to understand that we must defend peace, democracy, and freedom, and fight crime, corruption, violence, drug trafficking, and terrorism represented by Maduro's criminal dictatorship before it institutionalizes a totalitarian regime the likes of North Korea in Latin America.
Isaías Medina is a former Venezuelan diplomat. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
The effects of climate change move slowly, but they are broad. Weekend Edition is taking a look at these effects around the world. NPR's Jane Araf went to the ancient city of Alexandria in northern Egypt, where rising sea levels are causing great concern.
Music plays at a beachfront restaurant in Alexandria on the Mediterranean coast. With tourists worried about security, the restaurants are already almost empty. But there's a much bigger worry looming. Just ask Hazem Adel. He sells hats and handbags from a stall on the waterfront. There's no beach on this part of the shore. The sand washed away years ago. There's a sidewalk and then concrete barriers to keep back the waves of the Mediterranean.
The water used to flood and cover the people and their cars. That's why the government put up the barriers, to stop the high water so it won't flood the street.
Adel is one of tens of thousands of college graduates who can't find a job. In a poor country, rising sea levels and higher temperatures would hit tourism, fishing, and farming, and make Egypt even poorer. For 2,000 years, Alexandria's fortunes rose and fell with the sea. Near the souvenir sellers, guides lead tourists through a stone fortress built partly on the ruins of the Lighthouse of Alexandria, one of the wonders of the ancient world. For more than 1,000 years, the stone lighthouse was the tallest building on Earth. It used mirrors and fire to warn sailors away from the rocks. And then, after a series of earthquakes, it tumbled into the water. Over centuries, the sea erased the outline of the harbor itself.
There are huge limestone blocks covered with moss rising out of the water. The tour guides here say that they were part of the base of the lighthouse. But the remains of the lighthouse itself have been submerged for centuries. What used to be a thriving harbor here is now completely underwater.
Almost 1,000 years later, scientists generally agree that climate change is making the sea higher and hotter. On the Alexandria waterfront, local fishermen stand on the blocks, casting lines into the water. Salah Hilmi is trying to teach his 13-year-old son Mohammed how to fish. Hilmi has been fishing out here for sport for 25 years. He says the fish now are smaller. He throws the ones he catches to stray cats. He says bigger fish have retreated to cooler, deeper water.
Of course, it's normally really hot here in the summer, but the temperature here has become like the Arab Gulf countries.
The hotter it gets in Egypt, the fewer tourists will come. And the harder it will be for fishermen and farmers to make a living. It's a big worry for climate change experts like Mohammed Al-Ray. He sits looking out over the brilliant blue sea on Egypt's north coast. At the University of Alexandria, he's been researching climate change for decades.
The models show that the Middle East would increase in temperature and decrease in precipitation. The sea level rise would affect all coasts, all beaches, all lowland beaches.
Most scientists predict a sea level rise here of almost 30 inches by the end of the century.
Some areas will have water, will be covered by water. Also, some areas would suffer from seawater intrusion, which will make the soil more salty and the salinity of the water higher. So that will impact agricultural land in the northern delta.
That's Mohammed Kandil. He works for the World Bank, which says Egypt is one of the countries most vulnerable to climate change. Eventually, entire neighborhoods could be underwater. The Nile Delta that Kandil is talking about is crucial to Egypt. More than half of its crops are grown in that triangle where the Nile spreads out and drains into the sea. In farmland along the Nile, diesel pumps bring up water from the river for irrigation. Increasingly, seawater is creeping in. Yusuf Ghazali has been farming for 50 years. He says in the last few years, the water has become more and more saline. He shows me a patch of his land where he says nothing can grow.
The crops die. If you water them with salty water, they die immediately. If I had good water, I could grow rice, clover, cotton. I could grow anything.
Just 2 years ago, there was rice planted here, and now I'm looking at bare earth. Off in the distance, there are crops that look like they're dying as well, and a herd of very skinny cows.
Another farmer says they've had to abandon traditional crops like sugarcane because of the salinity of the water. Science on this is clear. It says greenhouse gas emissions from things like factories and cars are leading to global warming. I asked Ghazali if he's heard of human activity changing the weather.
We've heard for a long time we shouldn't burn wood or straw. They say because the smoke from that and smoke from the cars, it affects the temperature.
Further up the Nile Delta, Bader Mohammed, a fisherman, says winter storms have been so fierce recently, some villagers believe God is punishing them.
Last winter was the worst. The sea swallowed up some of the land and got closer and closer to the village. We're seeing things we never saw before in a way that could make us believe that this is anger from God on the village and its people.
Mohammed says fishermen here have to go further and further out to catch big fish. He shows me where the water is brown for a few hundred feet before it turns blue. That's where the sea covered what used to be bare earth. Mohammed says last year the winds were so strong, boats were tossed from the water up onto the road. He says he doesn't know if climate change is to blame. I can only tell you what I see, he says, the reality I'm living in. Jane Araf, NPR News on the Nile Delta.
You may not see tie-dyes and bell-bottoms there, but the locals call it the Woodstock of Serbia. Hundreds of thousands come each year to celebrate Balkan brass music at the Guča Trumpet Festival. This is the brass band of Bojan Ristic. His orchestra won Best Orchestra at last year's festival. They'll be on stage tonight as other trumpet masters compete in a musical Balkan battle. We got an audio diary of the festivities from Eleni Govetas. She's an American musician. Her parents play traditional Greek folk music, and she grew up going every summer to a Balkan music camp in California. This year, she's made her first pilgrimage to Guča.
Guča is kind of a small town. There's a river that runs directly straight up and down. It's a pretty dirty river. It's filled with trash. And then there's mountains. It's like a big bowl. There are mountains all around. Big green mountains. And then Guča is just the small little town right in the middle of the bowl. Very pretty. We walked through the whole town on the first night. On the left side, you've got rows and rows of cafes, little kiosks where you can buy beer, restaurants for crepes and whatever, street food. It's all the same, though, meat and bread. It's pretty much all you can find here. There's drunk folks climbing on statues, Romani brass bands busking on the street trying to make a buck. All the bands who are performing are parading through the streets, one after the other, all holding little signs of what village they're from. From my end, it's hard to even hear the difference to distinguish who's playing what. I'm actually really excited because there's a female trumpet player this year named Daniela Veselimovic, which may not sound like a big deal, but here it really is because there are no female musicians. In fact, it's taboo for women to really play music out here, so I'm rooting for her. This was at the very end of the Boban Markovic show. They had just finished playing Chai Shugaria, which is a favorite around here. You hear it about 30 times a day. The very last chorus, which you can hear everybody singing along, they just continued singing it. The folks are off the stage now, but the whole crowd doesn't want them to stop, so they continue singing.
That's Balkan music fan Eleni Govetas with an audio diary from the Guča Trumpet Festival, which finishes up tonight in western Serbia. You're listening to Weekend Edition from NPR News.
Good morning from WRVO Public Media. I'm Leah Landry. It's 10:35. Many people look forward to spending time in the sun when summer rolls around, but for others, that's difficult because they have sun sensitivity or even sun allergies. This week on WRVO's Health and Wellness show Take Care, hosts Lorraine Rapp and Linda Lowen speak with dermatologist Dr. Rosemarie Angleton of Mount Sinai Hospital about what causes these conditions.
Could you just give us the basics on sun sensitivity and how to distinguish that from a true sun allergy?
Well, sun sensitivity typically is going to be describing something where you react excessively sensitively to sun exposure. If you're in the sun and you are burning very quickly, within seconds or minutes, there may be something underlying it. You may be sun toxic because you are on a medication or something that is making your skin much more sensitive to the sun. Or you may have an underlying medical condition where inherently you are photosensitive. So, it's really just a matter of the scenario.
Well, let's talk about moving from a sensitivity to an actual sun allergy and this polymorphous light eruption. Would you explain what that condition is and how common it is?
Oh, goodness, it is so common. It's polymorphous in that it can look various ways on different people. Some people have little bumps. Some people have like a big red patch. Some people get a hive. But what's common with all of the patients is that it seems to be a seasonal thing. It tends to come up usually in the late spring and peters out as the summer goes on. What's typical about it, though, is where it shows up. So on the chest, the part that's exposed when you wear a V-neck shirt. It can sometimes be on the arms, but mostly it's that area between the neck and the middle of your chest. And it sometimes itches, sometimes it's just red, sometimes it's bumpy. It has various forms that it can appear in. But it's an autoimmune response. Your skin's immune cells are just misbehaving, basically.
Is this something that happens when you're a child, so you're aware that you have this sensitivity, or could it just come on out of nowhere when you're in midlife?
It can come on out of nowhere. That's more commonly how we see it. People, when they're 20s, suddenly start saying, I noticed at this particular time I'm getting these bumps, and they may itch, may not itch, and they go away, but they come back the following year.
What type of specialist would a person go to? Would it be a dermatologist, or would it be an allergist?
I would say dermatologist, because just in terms of the way we're trained, we are going to pick out what type of rash this is. An allergist is probably going to look at it and say it's a rash. Looks like it's an allergic rash, but they may not be able to put an exact name to it. And sometimes that specificity makes a difference in how you treat. So I would say start with a skin specialist.
And how to treat is my next question.
Well, usually we start with, make sure you're wearing sun protection. Most of the times we treat with a topical anti-inflammatory cream, maybe something that has a hydrocortisone base to it. And then there are those people who, no matter what you do for them, they don't get better, and they may need to do something called phototherapy.
But it sounds like avoidance is your best practice.
Yes, it is, to the best of your ability.
That was dermatologist Dr. Rosemarie Angleton speaking with Lorraine Rapp and Linda Lowen. More of this interview can be heard on Take Care, WRVO's Health and Wellness show this evening at 6:30. Support for this story comes from the Health Foundation for Western and Central New York. You're listening to Weekend Edition this Sunday on your source for NPR News. I'm Leah Landry. It's 10:39. Stay with us.
In 1947, Muslims on the Indian subcontinent got their own country, Pakistan. But in the decades since, the idea of who belongs has changed.
For the state, a good Pakistani is a man, a Muslim, obviously, religious, who loves his army and the state and hates democratic movements and certainly hates liberal Pakistanis.
Pakistan, 70 years after its creation, on the next Morning Edition.
Be with us for the next Morning Edition tomorrow morning from 5 until 10 on WRVO. Support comes from SUNY Oswego, named a Best Value College by USA Today, Princeton Review, and Kiplinger's Personal Finance Magazine. Learn more about SUNY Oswego at oswego.edu.
And the Sisters of St. Mary Ann Cope Shrine and Museum, celebrating an innovator in healthcare and patients' rights in central New York. Her leadership in providing for the outcasts of society is featured in the museum created in her honor. Details at stmaryancope.org.
I'm Giles Snyder with these headlines. President Trump's response to this weekend's violence in Charlottesville, Virginia is drawing criticism. Democrats and several Republicans are saying he should be denouncing hate groups by name instead of condemning the violence on what he said were many sides. A measure prohibiting private insurance companies from covering abortions is close to becoming law in Texas. The state Senate late yesterday approved a House-passed bill that requires women to purchase a separate insurance plan if they want abortion coverage. The governor is expected to sign the bill into law. And at the PGA Championship, the last major golf tournament of the year, Kevin Kisner is leading by one stroke in today's final round. I'm Giles Snyder, NPR News from Washington.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation, celebrating 20 years of grant-making, and the Doris Duke Conservation Scholars Program, helping train a diverse new generation of environmental professionals. Learn more at ddcf.org. And from Babbel, a language app that teaches real-life conversations in a new language, including Spanish, French, and German. Babbel's 10 to 15-minute lessons are available in the App Store or online at Babbel, BABBEL.com.
This is Weekend Edition from NPR News. I'm Lulu Garcia Navarro. Today is National Left-Handers Day, but you know what we always get right? Haha, it's the puzzle. Joining me, as always, is Will Shortz. He's puzzle editor of the New York Times and Weekend Edition's puzzle master. Will, good morning.
Good morning, Lulu.
Will you remind us of last week's challenge?
Yeah, I said that the word inauguration contains the letters of a number of animals, a gnu, goat, iguana, and a goody. And I asked the name of what 9-letter animal can be spelled from the letters of inauguration. And the answer is orangutan.
This week, we received over 2,000 correct responses, and our randomly selected winner is Jim Fry of Edina, Minnesota. Congratulations, Jim.
Thank you, Lulu.
Did you feel that this was an easy or a hard one?
I thought this one was a fairly easy one.
Okay, I understand, though, that you are a master of anagrams, so you might be particularly suited for this particular challenge.
Well, I don't know that I'm a master, but I enjoy working with anagrams.
All right, do you have a question for Will?
Well, I do, Will. I have, I love new words, and when they enter my life, I think, well, this is a good thing, and I'm wondering if you have a word that came to you recently that you've not heard before that you really like.
Wow.
Now you're on the spot.
I am on the spot. Yeah, I just learned a name recently, Riri, R-I-R-I, which is short for Rihanna.
Indeed.
You
just learned. I certainly did. I think anyone who follows Rihanna knows her as Riri. She is pretty famous.
She's famous. I didn't know Riri, so I was trying to decide, is this a legitimate answer for a New York Times crossword?
Ooh, all right, New York Times crossword players, you now know that might be in something sometime soon. Are you ready to play the puzzle? And by the way, my answer is yes, it is legitimate. Are you ready to play the puzzle, Jim?
Yes, I am.
Okay, let's play.
All right, Jim, you are in luck. We have anagrams today. Every answer is a familiar 3-word phrase in the form blank of blank. I'll give you anagrams of the words in the blanks. You identify the phrases. For example, if I said plum of Argus, you would say lump of sugar. So,
okay.
Here is number 1. Cat of dog.
Let's see. Act of God.
Good.
That is it. Number 2 is taco of Mars.
Coat of...
Yes. Uh-huh.
Coat of...
M-A-R-S.
Arms. Coat of arms.
Coat of arms is it. Stream of rats.
Bizarre?
It's not czar.
That's
Probably
a good
not
one,
a lot
too.
Of phrases. That's a good anagram. Not a lot of phrases blank of czar,
It's something that you get as a degree after your bachelor's.
There you go.
Oh, there we go. Okay. Arts. Master of Art.
There you go. It's your Master of Arts. Good. Stapler of Pears. Stapler is obvious, and pears is P-A-I-R-S. Stapler of Pears.
Stapler of Pears would be Plaster of Paris.
Good
job. There you go. Side of Charm. That's S-I-D-E. And Charm, C-H-A-R-M. Side of Charm.
Okay. Let's see here. Ides of March.
Ides of March. Good job.
Good.
And here's your last one. Mage of Hornets. That's M-A-G-E-H-O-R-N-E-T-S.
Mage of Hornets.
My favorite.
Game of Thrones.
Yes.
Game of Thrones,
yes.
is
it? It is my goal to get those 3 words into every single broadcast. How was that? How'd you feel? I thought you did great.
Well, thank you. Much harder than I have when I'm listening to the radio, as I mentioned. You got to breathe a little bit.
Anyone who listens to this should know it is much harder to play than sitting in your living room. So when you write in and you criticize, you should know it's hard, right?
That's right.
There you go. Jim, you did great for playing our puzzle today. You'll get a weekend edition, lapel pin, as well as puzzle books and games. You can read all about it at npr.org/puzzle. What member station do you listen to?
KNOW, part of Minnesota Public Radio.
Jim Fry of Edina, Minnesota. Thank you for playing the puzzle.
Well, thank you, Lulu, and thank you, Will.
Thanks.
What's next week's challenge, Will?
Yes, it comes from listener Patrick Berry of Jasper, Alabama. Name a long-running TV show in 2 words. Add a C, as in Charles, and rearrange the result to name another long-running TV show, also in 2 words. What shows are these? And here's a hint. Both shows are currently on the air, although the second one was most popular in the past. So again, name a long-running TV show, 2 words, add a C, rearrange the result, and you'll name another long-running TV show in 2 words. What shows are these?
When you have the answer, go to our website, npr.org/puzzle, and click on the Submit Your Answer link. Just 1 entry per person, please. Our deadline for entries is Thursday, August 17th at 3 p.m. Eastern. Include a phone number where we can reach you at about that time. And if you're the winner, we'll give you a call, and you'll get to play on the air with the puzzle editor of the New York Times and Weekend Edition's puzzle master, Will Shortz. Thanks so much, Will.
Thank you, Lulu.
Sometimes all you have to hear is a few notes, and you know that voice has been lived in. You can hear a long life of ups and downs, a rich and weathered sound.
Always remember that sad, sad day. I thought the world had ended when that train pulled away. I was just a little boy, scared and alone.
That's singer Jimmy Carter, one of the founding members of the Blind Boys of Alabama. The Grammy-winning group had their recording debut nearly 70 years ago, and now they have a new album, Almost Home. Mr. Carter joins us from the studios of WABE in Atlanta. Welcome, sir, to the program. It's an honor to have you on.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
And with you, if there is your longtime manager, Charles Dreby. Thank you for joining us as well.
It's a pleasure.
I'm going to start with you, Mr. Carter. When you released that debut single in 1948, did you ever think you'd still be recording all these years later?
I had no idea of it. And I always tell the people that ask me when the Blind Boys started out, we wasn't looking for any accolades, no kind of awards or nothing. We just wanted to get out there and sing gospel music. But, you know, since the accolades came, we're glad to get them.
No doubt. Charles Dreby, as the group's manager, as well as the executive producer of this album, Almost Home, you had an interesting approach. You came up with an intriguing way to invite songwriters to contribute songs for this album. Can you tell us about that?
Well, the life experiences of Jimmy and of Clarence Fountain, the group's longtime leader who's now retired, are very interesting and varied and long. And we interviewed them and sent those interviews to a group of very good songwriters and invited them to submit songs based on the lives of Clarence and Jimmy. And we got about 50 submissions back.
Wow.
Really a lot of great songs.
How closely do the lyrics follow those stories?
Well, some of them are direct quotes from the interviews with Clarence and Jimmy. One in particular is the song that Jimmy sings called Let My Mother Live. And the phrase, let my mother live till I get grown, came directly from his interview.
Let my mother live till I get grown. Let my mother live till I get grown. Don't leave me in a God-forsaken world all alone. Let my mother live till I get grown.
Jimmy, what was that about, that song?
It goes back. When I went to the school, it was a very difficult school to be in.
This was a school for the blind.
That's correct. And when my mom took me to the school, and when she left me there, I just was overwhelmed. I didn't know nobody. I didn't know what to do, and it was just devastating to me. You picture a 7-year-old boy in a school. He doesn't know anyone. He's just up there. It's a dreadful, dreadful feeling. And my dad had passed, and I just prayed to God that he would let my mother live till I get grown, to see me through my adolescence and, younger years. And he did.
And he not only did that, Jimmy, he let your mother live till she was 103 years old.
That's correct.
My goodness.
I remember when my mother used to sing, oh, the joy that her voice could bring. When I'm alone and I'm afraid, and I long to see her face, singing, bring her closer to me.
Mr. Drewby, why was it important to do something like this, do you think? Keep a record like this?
Well, Clarence and Jimmy are the only surviving original members, and the arc of their lives is mirroring the arc of some very important and sweeping changes in America and in the American South. And they have a unique experience with those changes, and the things that they've lived through are very good fodder for songs. Let's put it that way.
I've seen things in this world that keep me singing my song. I keep hoping for change, but sometimes it feels the same. I have to believe the labor I've done. I have to believe the songs that I've sung. I'm paying my train fare. I'm paying
Mr. Carter, you and Clarence Fountain, as you mentioned, are the surviving members of the original group. Unfortunately, Mr. Fountain couldn't join us, but we do have an audio clip from one of the interviews conducted with him. He was talking about how record execs tried to pressure the group to put out a blues or a rock record. Let's listen.
I was in the record studio. One man told me, name your price. I said, I don't have a price. I'm going to sing gospel.
I do want to hear from you about this, but first let's hear a song that speaks to that sentiment. It's called Stay on the Gospel Side.
I guess there were good times, and I know there were bad. but I never blame the Lord for the trouble I had. Oh, I just stayed on the gospel side. Stayed on the gospel side.
Mr. Carter, why did you want to stay on the gospel side? You could have made it big in pop, I'm sure, or rock or blues.
Well, we could have, but, you know, when we started out, we made a pledge. We said no matter what, we were not going to deviate from gospel music. This is what we came out here to do, and this is what we're going to do. So we had a lot of people to cross over. In fact, when Sam Cooke crossed over, we were right there at the same time in the same studio. And they offered us the same deal they offered him. Well, we turned it down, and I'm glad we did.
What's your favorite song on the album, sir? What's the one that means the most to you?
I think it's a good album, but if I had to just choose one, it would have to be Almost Home, I think.
Why? You're looking back at such a long career. What's the meaning of Almost Home for you?
Well, you know, we've done a lot, and I'm just about ready to. I'm not gonna say when, but I'm just about ready to stop, and so I got a few more things I would like to do before I do stop. But I'm almost home.
Jimmy Carter from the Blind Boys of Alabama and manager Charles Dreamy, thank you both so very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lulu.
He's not about to leave me now.
Almost Home by the Blind Boys of Alabama is released on August 18th, but a first listen of the album is now streaming on our website, nprmusic.org. Our theme music was written by B.J. Liederman. This is Weekend Edition from NPR News. I'm Lulu Garcia-Navarro.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Whole Foods Market, offering lunchbox staples geared to children, including sandwich and snack ideas using natural and organic ingredients. A variety of back-to-school items are available at Whole Foods Market. We believe in real food. And from The Little Market, a nonprofit organization founded by women to empower female artisans in developing countries around the world. An online store offering a collection of goods and gifts with a commitment to fair trade. More at thelittlemarket.com.
From around the state to where you live, WRVO brings you regional news.
The state's Board of Elections agreed to a third request from the federal panel. The board, made up of 2 Democratic and 2 Republican commissioners, voted to turn over to the panel names, addresses, birth dates, and records of when registered voters turned up at the polls, saying they had no lawful reason not to comply.
News, stories, clarity. It's WRVO Public Media.
It's 10:59. You're listening to WRVO Public Media this Sunday morning. I'm Jason Smith. Thanks for tuning in for Weekend Edition. Be sure to get caught up to date on the latest news from around the world and here at home with Morning Edition tomorrow morning from 5 until 10 on your source for NPR News. Heard across much of central New York at 89.9, in Utica at 91.9. You can also listen to us online at WRVO.org. In addition to listening to us live, you can check out some of our locally produced programs like the Campbell Conversations, Tuned to Yesterday, and Take Care, all at WRVO.org. The TED Radio Hour is coming up next on WRVO Public Media, a service of the State University of New York at Oswego, WRVD Syracuse, WRVJ Watertown, WRVH Clayton, WRVN Utica, WSUC-FM Cortland, WRCU Hamilton, WMVQ Fenner, and WRVO Oswego and Syracuse, and online at WRVO.org.
This is the TED Radio Hour. Each week, groundbreaking TED Talks.
TED. Technology.
Entertainment.
Design. Is that really what it stands for? I've never known that.
Delivered at TED conferences around the world.
The gift of the human imagination.
We've had to believe in impossible things.
The true nature of reality beckons from just beyond.
Those talks, those ideas, adapted for radio. From NPR. I'm Guy Raz. Coming up,
there is amazing wonder to be found in every academic subject.
Textbooks do a pretty bad job of that.
So what now what?
First thing is to just raise the level of expectation.
We want to put practice first.
The only person in charge of you making it fully is yourself.
This episode, Rethinking School. First, this news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Barbara Klein. Virginia police say a 20-year-old Ohio man is in custody for allegedly driving a car into a crowd of marchers opposing a white nationalist rally in Charlottesville yesterday. One person was killed, 19 injured, including Sam Becker.
This is an organization founding itself as a terrorist organization. They're clearly willing to kill people. This was not a protest. They attacked us. They attacked us while we were walking.
The federal government is launching a civil rights investigation. Meanwhile, NPR's Jeff Bennett reports President Trump is facing criticism from some members of his own party for not speaking out forcefully enough against white supremacist groups.
In his remarks yesterday from his golf club in Bedminster, New Jersey, the president seemed to suggest that both the white supremacists and counter-protesters were equally to blame for the violence in Charlottesville.
We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides.
His failure to name and explicitly condemn the white supremacists at the center of the unrest prompted an almost immediate backlash from key Senate Republicans, including Orrin Hatch of Utah, Florida's Marco Rubio, and Cory Gardner of Colorado, who wrote on Twitter, quote, "Mr. President, we must call evil by its name. These were white supremacists, and this was domestic terrorism." Jeff Bennett, NPR News, Washington.
CIA Director Mike Pompeo says he would not be surprised if North Korea tested another missile. Pompeo says he's confident North Korean leader Kim Jong-un will try to continue developing his missile program. 2 British government ministers are trying to heal divisions in that country over Britain's departure from the European Union. Some are calling for a so-called soft Brexit with minimal disruption. Others want the door slammed shut. Larry Miller reports the 2 government leaders have written an article in the Sunday Telegraph to pave the way toward a truce.
Treasury Chief Philip Hammond and International Trade Secretary Liam Fox say Britain will not stay in the EU by the back door and will completely leave the single market after Brexit. Hammond and Fox represent the opposing and feuding wings of the Conservative Party. After 2019, they say there'll be a fixed transition period to avoid a business-damaging fall off a cliff. The British government says it wants a special free trade relationship with Europe, but EU negotiators, frustrated with the UK's reluctance to define its position on most key issues, refuse to discuss trade until it does. Britain says it plans to publish position papers on some of these issues over the next 10 days. For NPR News, I'm Larry Miller in London.
This is NPR News. Kuwait is trying to contain an oil spill that's leaving long black slicks in the Persian Gulf and threatening power plants and water stations. Beaches are stained. Saudi Arabia and several U.S. companies are helping with the cleanup. Authorities are not saying how much oil has leaked or where it comes from. In India, the families of more than 60 infants and children who died at a government hospital in less than a week are blaming a shortage of oxygen. There are records showing the hospital hadn't paid for the oxygen, but NPR's Julie McCarthy reports officials deny that's the cause.
The chief minister of Uttar Pradesh, Yogi Adityanath, deflected accusations that low oxygen supplies had killed the children. He said they died as a result of poor sanitation that has fueled waterborne diseases. Adityanath's hometown, the site of the tragedy, has been an epicenter of Japanese encephalitis. killing thousands of children over the years. Local media report that the company supplying oxygen to the hospital sent at least a half a dozen notices asking authorities for payment. Government officials acknowledged that supplies had been disrupted, but that during the hours of disruption, no child had died. 30 deaths were recorded between Thursday and Friday alone. The hospital chief has been suspended, and there are calls for Adityanat's expulsion. Julie McCarthy, NPR News, New Delhi.
This is the last day of play at golf's PGA Championship in North Carolina's Quail Hollow. American Kevin Kisner leads by 1 stroke. He tees off this afternoon. Japan's Hideki Matsuyama is 1 stroke behind. This is NPR.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the estate of Joan Kroc, whose bequest serves as an enduring investment in the future of public radio, and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation at rwjf.org.
It's the TED Radio Hour from NPR. I'm Guy Raz. So, remember your high school science class? Maybe you had a textbook that sounded something like this.
Remember that a water molecule is polar with a partial negative charge on the oxygen atom and partial positive charges on the hydrogen atoms.
This is Tyler DeWitt.
So, good luck teaching that to 13-year-olds.
Before Tyler got his PhD, he taught high school chemistry and biology. And one day, he realized that he just wasn't getting through to his students.
I'm so excited to be describing and teaching my favorite topic in all of biology, which is viruses and bacteria. And I look out at all these students that I'm teaching, and they just have completely blank faces, right? It's like the joy that I brought to this subject myself. They're like, where is this coming from? Because we're not finding it in the textbook. And, what you appreciate in this subject is completely not our experience right now.
So you had a student, raise her hand and say, oh, this is just boring.
Yeah, I was like, can somebody just kind of explain the general gist of what you read in the textbook last night? And the student raises her hand, and she's like, yeah, I can tell you the gist. It was boring. It made no sense whatsoever. Totally confusing. It sucked, and why should I care? It was great because, it's that kind of honesty that you only get from young people. That sort of edgy teenage honesty can be a really good thing. And it was just sort of this wake-up moment for me. I was like, wow, if your only experience with this is reading the textbook, I can understand why you'd feel that way about this. It's such a shame how many creative, critical thinking people relatively rote, dry science education turns off. It's like, how many Nobel Prizes, how many cures to cancer, how many solutions to our energy challenges are locked in the minds of people who will never go anywhere near the scientific fields because they were so intimidated or turned off when they were in formal education, and they thought, God, I could never do that. I could never be a scientist.
For most of modern history, humans have taken smaller humans roughly between the ages of 6 and 17, and we've put them in these institutions to educate them. We call them schools. And that system is pretty much the same wherever you go, practically unchanged for 200 years. Kids sit in a room with a bunch of other kids, they listen to some information, they repeat it a few times, and then they go home. So today on the show, we're going to take a look at ideas about rethinking education, how we might want to change school, from the classroom to the technology available to the way we value teachers and the students they educate, and how all of this could transform education. But for Tyler DeWitt, rethinking education, especially science education, isn't actually all that complicated. It just takes some creativity.
Students really struggle to see how any of what they're learning really applies to their lives, really how science is more than a laundry list of memorized definitions and sort of nonsensical equations.
So back when Tyler was teaching about his favorite biology topic, bacteria and viruses, and his students basically told him that it sucked, he decided to change his approach with a story.
Now, the story that I start telling my kids, it starts out like a horror story.
Here's Tyler DeWitt on the TED stage.
Once upon a time, there's this happy little bacterium. Don't get too attached to him. Maybe he's floating around in your stomach or in some spoiled food somewhere. And all of a sudden, he starts to not feel so good. Maybe he ate something bad for lunch. And then things get really horrible as his skin rips apart and he sees a virus coming out from his insides. And then it gets horrible when he bursts open and an army of viruses floods out from his insides. If you see this and you're a bacterium, this is like your worst nightmare. But if you're a virus and you see this, you cross those little legs of yours and you think, we rock. Because it took a lot of crafty work to infect this bacterium. Here's what had to happen. A virus grabbed onto a bacterium and it slipped its DNA into it. The next thing is that virus DNA made stuff that chopped up the bacteria DNA. And now that we've gotten rid of the bacteria DNA, the virus DNA takes control of the cell and it tells it to start making more viruses. So when my students were first learning this, why did they hate it so much? Well, I can guarantee you that their textbooks didn't have horror stories. You know, in the communication of science, there is this obsession with seriousness. It kills me. I'm not kidding. I used to work for an educational publisher, and as a writer, I was always told never to use stories or fun, engaging language because then my work might not be viewed as serious and scientific. Right? I mean, because God forbid somebody have fun when they're learning science?
I mean, did you face any challenges from people who were like, well, that's just wrong. That's just wrong science. You can't turn bacteria and a virus into these characters without explaining the this and that and the exceptions and the anomalies, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, I think that's one of the biggest issues with science education and with trying to present science in an engaging way, particularly for young people. Science can be a highly technical discipline. And I think practitioners of that discipline will often argue, oh, you could never say this because that's dumbing it down. You know, that's ignoring an exception. And so there's always this tension between presenting something in an engaging way and then this sort of other side of, oh, no, you couldn't possibly say that because it's not completely correct. And that really frustrates me because in science, there is no perfectly correct explanation for anything. At every level of scientific information, we're presenting only part of the story. And we need to understand that we need to present what is relevant and what is accessible for each level of education appropriately.
So how did that change the way you talked about science?
Yeah, so I realized that relying on textbooks to convey the information just wasn't going to cut it. And so what good teachers do is they look at all of this very highly formalized information, all these resources, and a lot of what they do is translate it into this vernacular so that young people can, one, get excited about it, two, understand it, and three, see how to apply it in a broader sort of cognitive sense. And then they have to teach the students how to sort of package it back up and present it maybe on state or national assessments, again, in this sort of highly formalized, jargon-filled, very dispassionate kind of way.
So Tyler took those ideas to YouTube, where he started to make and upload videos all about different kinds of subjects in science.
Where I started teaching all this information, not from a textbook, but in a way that students could understand. You can remember this because cats have paws, and a cation is positive. Using simple language. We could have a mole of donuts, which would be 602 hexillion donuts, using fun analogies. A lot of people get confused by isotopes, so I want to describe them by starting out with an analogy to cars, okay? And originally it was just for my students, and then students from around the world started watching.
I'm often so disappointed when people think that I'm advocating a dumbing down of science. That's not true at all. I'm currently a PhD student at MIT, and I absolutely understand the importance of detailed, specific scientific communication between experts, but not when we're trying to teach 13-year-olds. And I wish that the change could come from the institutions at the top that are perpetuating these problems. And I beg them, I beseech them, to just stop it. But I think that's unlikely. So we are so lucky that we have resources where we can circumvent these institutions from the bottom up. There's a growing number of online resources that are dedicated to just explaining science in simple, understandable ways. There's still so much work left to be done, though. And if you're involved with science in any way, I urge you to join me. Pick up a camera, start to write a blog, whatever. But leave out the seriousness, leave out the jargon. Make me laugh, make me care. How should you start? Why don't you say, listen, let me tell you a story.
I mean, that kind of engagement requires a certain level of charisma and creativity by the science teacher.
I mean, I think it does. I also don't think that all science teachers need to be performers, that they need to be amazingly charismatic, right? I think there are many ways to make science engaging, but it does require that they look beyond just the facts and think more about what the overall purpose of education is and sort of what this broader narrative is.
You know, it seems to me that the underlying idea here isn't necessarily just about science. It really is about conveying passion for something that is filled with wonder.
Oh, very much so. There is